having an ancestral altar can be an incredible tool for healing, for activating your spiritual abilities, psychic gifts, for bringing forth and manifesting your desires, for processing your day, and so on and so forth. And don't be surprised if, as you begin building this relationship and this connection, that your dreams expand, that your spiritual abilities start to progress, that more abundance is able to be open to you, and so on and so forth. Have you been curious about creating an ancestral altar, what the do's and don'ts are, or even if it's safe to create an altar? I think it's important that we talk about why. Why should you have an ancestral altar? And I love to go and look at, okay, what were the ancient practices and why did those exist? What was the purpose of that? Because no matter what your ethnic background, at some point, your ancestors had altars. And listen, altars also exist in religions as well, because altars serve as this portal between the physical and non-physical realms. It stands as a physical representation of our connection to the beyond, to our divine selves, our divine aspects. And having an altar can be a really profound tool and experience in your life. So our ancestors kept altars mainly because they held a certain perspective. They had a perspective that, number one, no human being is an individual. In fact, there's nothing about yourself that is just you. That we are, in even just being an individual, we are a collective of consciousnesses. We are the result of ancestors over many generations, and also the land that we lived on, and the air that we breathed, and the food that we ingested, and the experiences that we had were imprinted on our DNA. The ancestral altar serves as a reminder of that connection and a way to keep that connection front of mind and also to really leverage it. So an ancestral altar is not so much about worshiping ancestors, which I think is a big misunderstanding when it comes to cultures that have ancestral reverence. Reverence is not the same as worshiping. It is really about your connection to yourself and being reminded of who you are and where you come from. I think that we've been seeing this resurgence in the importance of ancestry. Like, how many of us have gotten DNA tests recently, right? I feel like people have that desire right now more than ever to have that connection to something. And I feel like having the connection to your ancestors is powerful because it reminds you of who you are. When we're talking about dead relatives, we're talking about the identity or the ego of a specific person that lived before. And that person, that individual, may have done really awful things. And simultaneously, even the quote unquote worst people have this light within them, have this divine spark, this beauty, this purity, this consciousness in them. And so when we're talking about an ancestral altar, our intention for the altar is not that we are calling on our great uncle, but that we are accessing the divine part or the elevated aspect, right? Because we all have a higher and lower self. That is part of being human. But once you have shed that aspect of yourself, meaning you've transitioned to the other side, and also, because there's stuff in between, but even on the other side, you've moved through and navigated your attachments to this plane and then move on, right? And become an elevated ancestor. So once you've reached this status of elevated ancestor, that's when you're able to have influence in someone's life, in your descendant's life. So when we're using our ancestral altar, it's really important that we understand this delineation, right? So we utilize our ancestral altar as this point of connection, as this little reminder. We come and we sit at our altar, we connect to ourselves. And this is where we come to really center ourselves, ground ourselves in where we're going, where we've been. And it's like a moment to pause and just be. But let's talk about some of the best practices and some of the frequently asked questions about having an ancestral altar. Number one, there's a reason why there's a saying that cleanliness is next to godliness, because this space really represents your inner world. And we want to keep our ancestral altar as clean, as organized, dust-free, etc. We want to be quite meticulous about our altar, okay? And because of that, it's ideal to use a white cloth for your altar, really representing that purity, that pure foundation, that beauty, etc., and to regularly clean your altar. You want it to be a sacred place. So that could be above a fireplace. It could be on the mantle of a fireplace. It could be like on a buffet on the side of your kitchen. Or maybe I have an altar that's here in my office and it's, off to the side on a wall, and that way I can pull up my pillow. The other thing as well about where to put it, if you live in a small space, or if you are traveling, or maybe you're early on in your journey and you're living with other family and you're not yet comfortable building a whole altar, it's okay to have an altar box. What do you put on an altar? One of the really great things that you can put on an altar are pictures representing your family that at least you do know, or maybe you were able to get some pictures off of Ancestry, but some pictures of loved ones who have already transitioned onto the other side. And the rule here, I am going to give like a more solid rule on that. Do not put living people on the altar. You don't want to be calling them to become an ancestor. You don't want to be putting that intention of, yes, I'm talking to my ancestors, and there's like a living person that's on your altar. We don't want to do that. No living people there, but people who have made their transition and you want to maintain that connection to their spirit. Or even if you didn't have a great relationship with that person in this reality, but you do want to have a better relationship with them on the other side, which can be done, you can also put an image on the altar. You can also if you have some of their cherished or beloved items, you can also place some of these items there, maybe a piece of jewelry, or in my case, I have a Bible from my great grandmother that sits there on my altar. So an altar reminds us of where we come from, and it's a great place to also connect with the aspects of ourselves that come from nature, because there is no aspect of us that exists without all of the elements, right? So you can put items that represent each of the elements on your altar. I keep a money tree on mine. You can place wooden objects to represent Mother Earth or that earth element. You can have incense there. You can have candles. Water is also a really beautiful thing to put. Crystals, beads. Let's also talk about offerings as well. So it is very common to utilize offerings as an energetic exchange. Okay. And so the concept of energetic exchange is that when we wish to see something in our lives, we have to be willing to let go of some energy in some way, shape, or form. So some offerings that you can make, candles can be used as an offering. Incense can also be an offering. You can also use food as an offering, sweet things, what you had for dinner, but the very first serving, not the leftovers of that. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be a very small amount. And what I was about to say before was, because we're talking about ancestral offerings, we can also utilize some of the things that our ancestors that they loved. And that could be some of their favorite wines, right? Or maybe it's their favorite tea, for example. Again, every altar is going to look different, and it's going to change over time, and that's okay. The last thing that I want to say about approaching your ancestors or approaching your ancestral altar is just the importance of the language that you use while you are in that space, because this is a space where you're coming and you are shifting your consciousness, and now you are really proclaiming what it is that you desire to experience in the world. And the language that we use there matters, and also has a big influence on what we experience at the altar. So when you approach your ancestors, it's really important that you be very clear that you are calling on your ancestors who have your highest good in mind, right? That you are there to connect with the divine light that exists in your ancestry, right? And also, this is a place for communication. So it's a place where we can speak out what we are struggling with, what's not going well, and simultaneously we want to speak to, this is what I'm struggling with, and I'm grateful for blank, and I'm experiencing more abundance and healing and harmony and deeper connection and so on and so forth. So don't leave the altar on, a negative note on all of the things that are hard for you right now or that you're struggling with. Leave it on where you're going. Speak to what you are calling forth to be your experience in life. And listen. Most of us, many of us, grew up in environments where we did a lot of praying, and praying is like one direction. But your ancestral altar is a place for you to receive as well. After you have said what you wanted to say, expressed, etc., make sure to give yourself time to just hear and receive and gain insight, downloads, etc. And don't be surprised if, as you begin building this relationship and this connection, that your dreams expand, that your spiritual abilities start to progress, that more abundance is able to be open to you. If this was helpful, or if you have any more questions that you'd like me to go into on another episode, just hit me up on Instagram in my DMs at theroyalshaman. And I look forward to seeing you next time.